Everyone will reconvene the meeting from yesterday, and we're on item 7, if I remember correctly. Just a couple of things before we start. I've had something come through from Councillor Johansson regarding a possible amendment or foreshadowed motion, so we'll get staff advice on this, and then I'll rule on whether it is an amendment or a foreshadowed motion. Thanks. The other one was from Deputy Mayor Andrew Turner. Since our discussion, he's happy to withdraw his original amendment, and we're actually going to include in what myself and Councillor Temple have moved and seconded a third item, which can we just pull up the third part to the resolution at the start, things. The third bit, which includes Andrew's. Oh, yeah. Yep. So that's going to not be an amendment, it's going to actually fall into the resolution as number 3. Okay, so thank you. I'll get staff to talk to Councillor Johansson's wording, and then I can make a ruling on it.
Thank you. So the notice of motion is that a more restrictive approach be taken in the central city, such that any use of a residential unit for home share accommodation over 60 days is non-complying. There's 2 points to make to that, and the first point, if I can ask this slide with the flow chart be brought up, if possible. I'll talk to it in any case, but the key point is that we're at the start of a formal process. As Alison indicated yesterday, we're at the yellow arrow. The next steps through this process will enable feedback from the community to be expressed by submissions and further submissions, and thirdly by presenting to a hearings panel. There is still a significant opportunity for that participation through the process. The second point I wish to make in respect of this alternative is that the information before you contained within the Section 32 doesn't currently provide justification for that change. That option of a more restrictive approach for the central city was considered as part of the Section 32 evaluation, and to amend the plan change now presents a risk, in the sense that making an amendment by way of the resolution without the supporting evaluation is not, there's not a robust basis to amend the plan change as simply as that. We need to ensure there's a sound basis that will stand up through the RMA process, and so in that context there is a concern, and with that in mind, from a staff perspective, we couldn't support, based on the current information, that resolution being put through as a change to the plan change. Having said that, if council were to decide to support that resolution, we would ask that the matter is referred back to staff for further investigation, rather than dealing with it as part of any approval of the plan change.
Thank you. So before I make a decision, and I'm leaning towards the fact that it is a foreshadowed motion and not an amendment, can I just get confirmation from Ian that I'm on the right track?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. So I'll rule that Councillor Johansson has actually moved a foreshadowed motion, which is seconded by Jake. Thank you.
I just have clear, sorry, without having the one that number 3, is that something that could be added to the central city then, if that's not able to be put
The engagement will be done. I've ruled that as a foreshadowed
all
motion.
I'm suggesting, obviously this was a similar
So,
one.
I've made
specific
my
area.
ruling and it's final, so there's no discussion. Yes, they obviously went through questions and they were all concluded. So I just want to go straight into debate.
So could we put 3 separately when
Yes.
you come to the vote? Thank you.
Is there any debate?
Mr. Chair, just a question from me. Are you wanting us to debate the foreshadowed motions in one fell swoop?
You're more than welcome to talk to the foreshadow motion, because it may, obviously, if this one carries, it will not be put. So you can include it in your debate if you choose to.
All right.
So, Andrew.
Thank you. I'd like to start just by acknowledging Mike as the chair and Brendan as advisor for work done overnight, which solved the issue that I was raising yesterday by way of what we now see in front of us as paragraph 3 in this resolution, and also acknowledge Mike and Sarah as the mover and seconder for allowing that to go in there as paragraph 3 rather than need to deal with it by way of an amendment. So one size doesn't fit all, and what's right for the central city or suburban Christchurch isn't always the right answer for Banks Peninsula. There are areas of Banks Peninsula where much of the development over many years has been almost exclusively around building holiday homes. There are settlements on the peninsula which are almost totally made up of holiday homes, and in many cases there wouldn't be any development there at all if it wasn't for holiday homes. Little Akaloa and Tikau Bay, both of which are on the list that was produced yesterday, are really good examples of this. These are batch settlements, and there's been a tradition of owning batches and renting out these batches for many generations, way before online platforms such as Airbnb or Book a Batch were even thought about. In many parts of the peninsula, even in Littleton and Diamond Harbour, almost all of the smaller settlements, there's no alternative to batch or guest house type accommodation. So we're not taking away from commercial operators in these locations because there aren't any. Now, Akaroa's economy in particular is likely to go through a hard time in the near future, with no cruise ships, with no international guests, and a far greater reliance on domestic visitors. Being able to provide a range of accommodation which will attract a range of guests is going to be really important. This will hold for other parts of Banks Peninsula as well. Littleton still suffers development economics issue in the rebuild after the earthquakes and a lack of economic recovery. So having more people able to stay in Littleton will help Littleton businesses recover and increase the chances of the development economics stacking up and there being a need for more commercial premises to be built in Littleton. So I encourage making it as easy as possible for visitors to stay on Banks Peninsula by encouraging providing availability and that choice of accommodation. It's visitors that will provide the footfall for local coffee shops, for cafes and for restaurants and for retail businesses, for the hospitality and retail industries in general and for the visitor industry. All industries hard hit by COVID. It's those businesses which to a large extent create work for the people of Akaroa. Around 80% of Akaroa's work is in those sectors and make it a viable place for families and working age people to live. So the argument that batches are taking away from people's opportunity to live in Akaroa, the thing that represents the risk to Akaroa being a viable place to live for families is lack of work. Taking away the ability to effectively run holiday homes reduces that ability. So to make it more difficult for this type of accommodation to operate risks other aspects of the Akaroa economy, which are already at risk at exactly the time that Akaroa needs its visitors most. So we're using a big hammer to crack a big nut. A problem in the central city and possibly other areas of essentially commercial, multi-unit, high and medium density accommodation operations in areas where there is already plenty of commercial guest accommodation. And in my view, so we should be, for the reasons that have been well articulated by a number of people who spoke to the meeting yesterday, but using the same big hammer to crack a nut that probably doesn't even exist on Banks Peninsula makes no sense at all. So I appreciate that we've been able to include paragraph 3 in the resolution today, and I urge councillors to support that. I note that there's been a request for it to be put separately. I would request that you do support paragraph 3 for the reasons that I've set out. This is one of those times that we need to accept that the peninsula is different and has different needs and issues than other parts of Christchurch. And I do agree with everything else that's put forward in the original position, and I think including paragraph 3 allows for the opportunity for a sensible approach on Banks Peninsula based on feedback that we get from the community and raising awareness of the way that these new provisions would affect parts of the peninsula in a way that perhaps wasn't envisaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. You're lucky I forgot to put the timer on. No one else will be so lucky. Melanie.
I just wanted to say that I support the staff recommendations, so points 1 and 2. I think they've done a really good job and brought a good potential plan change to us. It will go up for consultation and we'll have a chance at that time to hear from the people in proper submissions.
Sarah.
Thank you. Like Melanie, I support the staff recommendation. It's been through a really thorough engagement process to get to this point already. Neighbours make a community, and we know just how valuable our communities are, both in times of crisis and for our everyday well-being. I'm in favour of shared homestay and a wide choice of accommodation for visitors, as well as residents being able to make a bit of additional money through renting out their whole home for short times. However, when a whole home is rented out short-term for months on end, there is no community, no neighbourliness, and no resilience in times of crisis. Home share for more than 180 days is clearly a commercial venture, and there are many people who've got more than one. The current proposals seek to strike a balance between allowing bed and breakfast style accommodation where residents can earn some extra money and share their home, and then putting some restrictions on those who can rent out their whole home for short periods of time to encourage residential occupation in residential areas and support existing communities. I'm looking forward to seeing it go through a thorough process and hearing what comes back to council at the end.
Jake. Good.
I can't hear you over your shirt, Jake.
You're not on.
It is now? Oh, there we go. Look, this is a really big issue in my ward. It's probably, if not the biggest issue that CBD residents raise with me. In that part of my ward, community is literally being hollowed out, and that's damaging to the very idea of community itself. So of course I welcome this change, but we need to do more. We need to get our rating piece in order so that we can be charging proper commercial rates to these commercial enterprises, and we need to get our enforcement into gear. We need enforcement with teeth, and those are the next two pieces of this process that I'm going to welcome, if not more than this one. To the Airbnb operators that are operating unhosted and full-time businesses in this way, I say, tough. This is the cost of doing business. This is the compliance cost you should have to pay. And also, I do support the foreshadowed amendment the foreshadowed motion that myself and Councillor Johansson have put. However, if that isn't to pass here, then I'm still very supportive of the substantive, and I'm also cognizant of the fact that this is just stage one, and I'll be very staunch in ensuring those other two stages, both the rating and the enforcement piece, come to us in good order and good time.
Tim.
Thank you. Look, learnt something very important over this process is the difference with regards with Airbnb, those commercial operators that have quite a few and that are not really interested in holding people's hands and welcoming them to Christchurch and showing them Christchurch experience, and those operators that actually are a true Airbnb and there for their guests and welcoming, etc., a real Cantabrian way to operate. So I've learned a lot over the last few days. With regards to 3, I will not be supporting that. I think that the areas in Takamatua and other areas, they've been doing renting batches in their homes for some time now, decades in fact, some of them, and so I don't see how that can really change with these rules. I think that we've got to be treated as one city and get that over the line and separate the true commercial operators that are taking the guts out of those inner city areas, as they will do in Banks Peninsula and others. I do think that we really do need to look at those differences, and that is crucial, irrelevant of where they are within the city. And if you're talking about economic stimulus, I think Littleton, when the market's going, is absolutely outstanding and well done to that community, but there are other communities in the city that do need support. So I think we look at this in one hit, and so I will not be supporting 3. Thank you.
Jimmy.
Thank you again. I think the staff recommendation probably is compromise based recommendation, because we heard the kind of business group and also from the Airbnb. But if we review those information, at the moment our current discipline provision still are not the most effective and efficient way to achieve our objective and some of our policy, etc. And also the Environment Court already comments the council consider initiate a plan change, particularly to identify clearly all those the short-term accommodation, different categories like Airbnb, home host, or home aware, or book bags, and how many days category. We still need to be identified. But in here, particularly the Airbnb, the host, they concerned probably didn't have the actual cash, to pay those the resource concern. So during that time, probably the staff might consider, how to dealing with this issue or mitigate this effect, etc. Yeah, but generally speaking, this proposed the short-term visitor accommodation discipline change and go to the consultation. So I fully support. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanni.
Thank you. I'm just reading through the section 32 and just wanted to highlight that one of the comments in here is that there is some risk that increased demand for home share accommodation as an investment vehicle in the residential central city zone, particularly in areas near the CBD or the proposed multi-use arena site, could make it more difficult to attract and maintain strong, cohesive communities or permanent residents in those areas. The feedback has also been overwhelming from local residents within the central city as to the concern about the impact being negative. A significantly higher percentage of central city residents considered that home share accommodation had a negative impact on the sense of community compared with responses across the district. And yet, what we've heard yesterday, we're not proposing to recognise that, which I think is a real shame. The other irony is we were given some advice yesterday that we couldn't be inconsistent with the Central City Recovery Plan, which actually says that we want to increase the number of permanent residents in the Central City, that we want to protect the amenity of existing Central City residential neighbourhoods and assist with creation of new inner city neighbourhoods, and that we want to achieve a predominantly residential environment in the residential Central City zone. So actually, the proposed foreshadowed amendment would deliver against that much better than what we're currently proposing. This is only talking about unhosted home share accommodation. I have no issue with the people that share their house or have an apartment where connected to their dwelling, which they make available through Airbnb. The hosted Airbnb, or home share I should say, I think is fine. But what we know, that evidence is actually clear in our own report that actually there's a huge risk to having unhosted accommodation in the central city that will destroy residential coherence and amenity by having a transient population rather than a permanent population. It's inconsistent with our central city plan, and this is simply a minor amendment to reflect that based on the concerns that we heard yesterday. So I would hope that you would support it. I'm not quite sure that it's completely against the whole thing, and I would also question why under 3 we can have special engagement with Banks Peninsula that would get any different outcome than what we'd have not being done in the central city. So I sort of struggle to understand why we even have 3 in there, because I would have thought that through this process every community deserves to be engaged with equally, to be understanding what the impacts are and to have their views put forward in a equal manner, not just one specific area getting some sort of special treatment. So, you know, I think we should be able to make changes based on what we've heard and what's in the document. I completely disagree that the Section 32 means that the amendment that I've put forward is contrary to what we're doing and not supported by it. So I won't be supporting the main one as a result. And I'd also just say that personally, you know, it's been good to hear from people. I think the key thing is we should be using the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. We have unique challenges as a city in Christchurch with the earthquakes and everything that we've been through as a result, and it does seem crazy to be using normal RMA processes to deal with what is a really significant issue facing our city that is unique to any other city in the country. Thank you.
Sam?
Maybe look, there's always one round at council table that'll go against the grain, I guess, and look, unfortunately today that's me. I don't support this in the form it's at, and I do so because I came onto council to look at how we can reduce red tape and reduce bureaucracy, and I don't think resource consents are the way to address the issue. We heard yesterday quite comprehensively from a lot of interested parties about the need to get parity in the system, and this doesn't do it. In my view, it would be far better to have an earlier focus on how we address the commercial rate issue, and also around the health and safety of building compliance. And I know that will feed into the LTP next year, but I just fundamentally disagree with the approach. And I think the point that hasn't been mentioned here, probably most importantly today, and we shouldn't forget it, is the fact that actually central government have failed in this area. You know, if we're going to do this in a comprehensive way across the country, there needs to be a central register. And I think fundamentally we're creating our own bureaucracy, additional compliance costs with no real value add. So I completely appreciate the concerns raised within the community, but if we're looking long term at this, I think that the approach we're taking is more compliance as opposed to value adding for the city, so I can't support it in this current form.
Thank you. Aaron? Yeah, if there's one thing that's certain is that the world will always move and change a lot quicker than a council will, and today's this paper is a pretty clear example of that. I mean, the horse had bolted on this type of visitor accommodation. There'll be new things that come out like Uber and Lime scooters and everything else. The world does keep changing, and then we play catch up on the rules. I agree with Sam on the points around red tape and does this actually fix the problems that were overwhelmingly brought to us yesterday from both sides. I don't see how this actually does get us there. The ones that do get there is let's get to the outcome that we need to seek, and it is equity and rating. Like if you buy an apartment and rent it out full time for Airbnb, you've just bought a hotel room. You just own your hotel's just one room. That's all you've done, and you should be paying rates the same as a hotel does, and the same with motels and so on and so forth. So let's even up the playing field. Same on health and safety, and it would be really good as we go through that process to see if we can target that commercial rate as an accommodation provider rate. So as those units come online paying a commercial rate, that comes off the other accommodation rates around town. We don't lump all commercial rates in together. So if we could crack that one, boy, would be a cool council. Leanne?
On the 11th of December last year, this committee directed staff to undertake public engagement on a range of options, report back and recommend a preferred option. So I'd like to thank staff for doing what we asked them to do. And I just noted yesterday from the deputations, and it was regardless of what side of the debate people were on, that people were complimentary of the engagement that had taken place. When one's going through a plan change proposal, which is something that we asked staff to specifically recommend. Engaging the public, often when there are differing points of view, in an early way enables a better process to be developed, and I think it has fed into an excellent Section 32 report, and one that can be substantiated. We were asked by the court, and I'm just desperately trying to find the page of the report that refers to it, but the report of the court considered this matter, and they asked us to look at our district plan. They said, and I agree with Aaron in the sense that our district plan has been behind what have been dramatic changes in a relatively short space of time. And so the court said to us to look to our own district plan, an Environment Court decision in December 2019, Archibald and CCC, and monitoring other decisions on resource consent applications. And we know, we've heard from the community about some of those resource consent applications where we know that Airbnb is lying behind some of the proposals that are coming up, but it's hard to prove when the application says, no, it's not an Airbnb proposal. So the court's comment essentially highlighted that when the district plan was last reviewed, demand for visitor accommodation and residential dwellings was not specifically identified as a significant RMA issue for the council, for the district. The court noted that the plan provisions may not adequately respond to the demand for this activity, and said that the council may consider initiating a plan change. We've had a pretty clear steer from the court. We had a steer from this committee for staff to do what they have done. I think that, and it was something the chair said yesterday, which was there seems to be one group that says we haven't gone far enough and another group that says that we've gone too far. And through the next part of the process, there will be a commissioner sitting listening to formal submissions, and will make a decision about that. Will come back to us for a decision in the future. So I would like the process to proceed, so I'll be supporting the motion today.
Okay. Is there anyone else before I wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe thanks.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Jamie, I forgot about you.
Look, I think what's being proposed here is overzealous in some aspects and actually undercooked in others. So I agree with Sam, too much red tape and too convoluted. But I want to make clear where I stand on it. I think Airbnb accommodation sharing platforms and the like are great. The world and technology is evolving, and if you don't adapt, well, you'll become extinct pretty quickly. But Airbnb and those other platforms, their popularity isn't because they expose loopholes, but because they're easy, they're intuitive, and they suit people's modern needs. So hosting people in your home or allowing an unused batch to be utilised, I just can't accept that that's an issue at all. Yet this proposed plan change aims to tackle it in some areas, or certainly put speed bumps around it in others. And I'm in complete agreement with the hoteliers and moteliers who want a level playing field. I couldn't agree more with them, specifically in the instances where someone purchases or converts a dwelling that they don't live in. They decide against tenanting it traditionally because the yield isn't enough, and instead, by all intents and purposes, they operate it exclusively as nightly accommodation without having to pay a cent of the additional costs or follow any of the regulation that all the others who operate in this industry have to adhere to for offering the exact same service. So if someone buys a shoebox apartment and treats it as a mini hotel, that's not only unfair, but I think it's absurd that they would be treated as if a resident lives there and that it's not being used for a commercial purpose, because clearly a resident does not live there and it is being used for nothing else other than a commercial purpose. So I think for me, this sort of proposes addressing some of the issues with a big, hefty, blunt instrument. And I think, when both parties aren't overly happy, then that's a good indicator that you've maybe struck a fair price in a sale and purchase agreement. But I totally disagree that that analogy works when you're writing or proposing local regulation or plan changes. And I think the real kicker for me is that I don't even think council should be doing this. You'll get a confused and disjointed approach across the country, and the real issues stemming from it may not even be addressed. They might be at best, but it reeks of a hospital pass that we got from central government with the local alcohol policy, where the real issue there was councils wanting to stop placement of proliferation of off licences, yet it turned into a basket case of inconsistent and unintended consequences. So to me, this looks pretty similar. Tourism doesn't care where local boundaries begin and end, and you'll end up with this disjointed and confused mishmash of rules and needless costs. So in my view, New Zealand is small enough for the government to drive this, get a national register in order, leave the little guys who are doing no harm to anyone alone, and treat commercial accommodation providers as exactly what they are. So I'll be voting against all of it because it's completely broken in my view.
Thank you. All right, so I'll close the debate. And firstly, I'd just like to thank staff. There's obviously been a lot of work to go into this, and also everyone that has engaged, and the people that came yesterday to give deputations. It is a long process, and there's still actually a lot of time to go before it actually reaches a conclusion. The decision we're making today is obviously whether we're going to notify this proposed plan change, and that we'll be going out with the preferred option that is in front of us. And so there is, through the next process, more opportunity for people to actually engage through proper submissions to a hearings panel, which will then come back for a final decision by this committee. It has been said already, we have many different stakeholders that actually have been involved in this process. Some obviously believe that we're going too far, some believe we're not going far enough, and it's always going to be hard to get it right, and we're never going to please everyone. And I think potentially the fact that we're seem to be not pleasing many people at all, potentially we've actually got it right. But the next stage, I guess, is probably the most important stage, is actually where this goes out through a proper RMA process, and you actually do the submissions, and there could be some more fine-tuning and working out of actually where it is right and not right, and actually it comes back to a final decision. One of the things I have obviously noticed throughout the course of the last few days is, I guess, some thoughts from people that aren't quite correct. The hosted visitor accommodation, it's still going to be seen as a permitted activity. There'll be some small rule changes around that, and I'm sure during the next process there'll be a lot of feedback in that. Also, currently, all unhosted visitor accommodation requires a resource consent, and I'm not too sure if many people are aware of that. It was very clear in the Environment Court ruling last year that with the increase of this type of accommodation providers, that our district plan is no longer fit for purpose, and it needs to be addressed, and that is what we are doing right now, and we're only halfway through this process. In regards to number 3, engage in Banks Peninsula, I happily support that. Honestly though, actually all areas of every community that are affected are going to be actually engaged equally. It's important that we do get it right and get out to everyone that needs to actually input into the next stage. I actually agree that central government need to be doing a little bit more from their end, but actually we need to fix what's broken at our end at this point too, which is actually the district plan rules as they stand. So I do recommend that everyone supports what's in front of us. And on that note, I'll put 1 and 2. All those in favour? Aye. Against?
No.
We could do it.
Yes. Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Chen?
Yes.
Councillor Chu? No. Councillor Coker?
Yes.
Councillor Cotter?
Yes.
Councillor Daniels?
No.
Councillor Davidson?
Aye.
Councillor Galloway?
Yes.
Councillor Goff,
No.
Councillor Johansson,
No.
Councillor Kewen,
No.
Councillor McDonald,
No.
Councillor Major,
No.
Councillor McClellan,
No.
Councillor Scandrett,
Yes.
Councillor Templeton, it's carried 9 to 8.
Thank you.
Oh,
Number 3, of all those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
Division?
no.
Mayor? Yes. Councillor Turner,
Yes.
Councillor Cheng,
Yes.
Councillor Chu, Councillor Coker,
Yes.
Councillor Cotter,
Yes.
Councillor Daniels,
No.
Councillor Davidson,
Yes.
Councillor Galloway, Councillor Goff,
No.
Councillor Johansson,
No.
Councillor Kewen,
No.
Councillor MacDonald,
No.
Councillor Major,
Yep.
Councillor McClellan.
Yes.
So was that a yes?
Yes.
Councillor Scandrett,
No.
Councillor Templeton. That is passed 10 to 7.
I'll declare that one carried too. Obviously, the foreshadowed motion is removed. And on that note, I'll get Councillor Templeton to close this meeting with a kind of key. Do you want me to go a bit slow?
We're here.